A few weeks ago, I started writing an article about relegation from the Premier League, but in my research I discovered a secret, something that until now I don't think anyone else knew. What I discovered was so mad that I remain convinced that I'm wrong. For Energy Sport, this is Premier League relegation, the numbers. Benjamin Franklin once said that in life 3 things are certain: death, taxes, and relegation. It's a subject that has quietly interested me for a number of years. Thankfully, it's something I've never experienced myself, and I hope I never do. When a team gets relegated, you are guaranteed to see a few things: players slumped on the pitch, loss, confusion, and fans, actual grown men, in tears. This is a completely different feeling to losing a cup final. After a year of dismal performances and results, this is the moment it hits you. Your own inferiority compounded with the reality of your situation. And it's just sad. It also happens a lot. I'm doing this video in April, which means we are in, or are coming to, peak relegation season. This May alone, in the top 4 divisions in Scotland and England, at least 15 teams will be relegated. There will be at least 15 tragic stories of demise and loss, and it is all unpreventable. In the 25 full seasons of the Premier League, there have been 76 total relegations, and that's where today's video is going to focus on. A total of 38 clubs make up those 76 relegations, with 4, Crystal Palace, Middlesbrough, Norwich and Sunderland, making up over a quarter of them. I'm not as interested in clubs though, because at the end of the day they go on. With the notable exception of Wimbledon, who were relocated to Milton Keynes when they were relegated from the Premiership in 2000, clubs generally do okay. They survive, I mean. As this table shows, the majority of relegated clubs who aren't now back in the Premier League reside in the Championship, with a few dotted in Leagues 1 and 2. At the end of the day, they're still functioning. And hey, the Premier League isn't the be-all and end-all anyway. I'm more interested in the players because that's where the real stories lie. Relegation is often an uncertain time for the players. It's not a lot of fun, but there is a select group of individuals who have had this happen to them time and time again. I know this because I've counted all of them. I've counted 337 players to have been relegated from the Premier League more than twice. Of that, 50 of them have been relegated 3 times, 10 4 times, and they're at the end, my 2 heroes of the video, the only 2 players in the history of the Premier League to be relegated 5 times. But more on them later. There are some great stories hidden away in this list. In particular, I'm a fan of the successive Premier League relegations, so when a player gets relegated with one team, moves to another to stay in the league, and then gets relegated with that team the next season. Nigel Quashie is probably my favourite example of that. Quashie was a respected Premier League player, and he represented Scotland 14 times between 2004 and 2006, but he also absolutely loved getting relegated. He's one of the 10 players to be relegated 4 times, and did so with 4 different clubs. But it's the relegations here, in 2005 and 2006, that are where it's at. In both years he joined halfway through the season but was relegated 6 months later. Quashie was so close to completing the hat-trick the following year. Again he moved back to the Premier League in January, now with West Ham, who stayed up by a point in the final day of the season. It might not be the right word, but I really admire that for 3 seasons in a row, Premier League managers turned to Quashie to help them in the fight for survival. That, despite whatever had happened before, when it got to January they were like, yep, we know who to call. Elsewhere in this elite club, there are also the guys who suffered relegation multiple times with the same club. Crystal Palace were relegated 3 times in 6 seasons in the 1990s. Only 2 players were with them for all 3, Dean Gordon and Simon Roger. Some of the other players to be relegated 4 times include Marcus Bent, Sebastian Bassong and Curtis Davis. But it's these guys here, Nathan Blake and Herman Hreidarsson, the only players in the Premier League to have been relegated 5 times, that I want to talk about. These guys are heroes, honestly. They were both relegated with every team they played with in the Premier League. Blake was a good enough player who represented Wales 29 times, but he never actually managed to survive a season in the top flight. Hreidarsson was slightly different. After immediate relegations with Crystal Palace and Wimbledon early in his career, Hreidarsson managed to stick around for a bit with Ipswich and then Charlton and then Portsmouth. But relegation always came to him eventually, like the club's fate was effectively sealed from the moment they signed him. I can't see how these guys are going to lose this record anytime soon. They will be known as the kings of relegation. People will laugh, but I respect them. There's a reason clubs continue to have faith in them and their abilities. It's just a shame that it was these usual suspects that continued to get dragged into relegation battles year after year. They aren't alone. This is the entire list of players who have been relegated from the Premier League. Some great players are on here. Champions League winners, Ballon d'Or winners. There are players who played in World Cups and at the highest level for the majority of their careers. But it all counts. So, how exactly long is this list? So, this is where I start doubting myself. I believe that since its first season in 1992, there have been 1,636 players relegated from the Premier League. I got that number by taking the squad lists from relegated teams and taking away the players who didn't play a minute, left before the end of the season, or had been relegated before. There are some complications, like what happens to players who are on loan? Well, if they were with the team at the end of the season when they got relegated, then yes, I believe that counts. In any case, it's more than viable. Let's take the 76 teams to have been relegated from the Premier League since 1992 and multiply it by an average playing squad of, say, 26. That's 1,972, but then you're not taking into account the amount of players who have been relegated before. Like I said earlier, I counted 337 players to have been relegated from the Premier League multiple times, which leaves 1,635. That's an extremely rough estimation to back up the figure that I actually counted. But what's important here is how does that relate to the overall number of players to have actually played in the Premier League. This article published by the BBC before the start of the season states that 3,835 players have played in the Premier League, which means that by my calculation, 42.7% of players to have played in the Premier League have been relegated. I didn't believe it when I first saw it, and I still don't now. It just seemed way too much, but the numbers don't lie. I've been through the squads, discarded the players who didn't play or who left, taken into account those who had been relegated before, and 42.7%. This is our percentage. The scariest thing for me is I haven't seen anything which suggests or acknowledges this figure to be anywhere near this high. Like it's almost half, and I don't think anyone knows. We collectively place so much emphasis on relegation year after year, completely oblivious to the fact that it's happened to almost half the players who have ever played in the league. It says a lot if it's right. This ridiculous list of 1,636 professional footballers says a lot. Only 3 teams can be relegated a season, and yet, the drop eventually catches you. For almost half the players in the league, it's unavoidable. You can fight it for years, but it will always be there. It will always get you. So this was just a quick video that I made. Hopefully it hasn't been a complete waste of time. If you think I'm wrong or if you disagree with me, then just tell one of your friends, because I'm sure they would be really interested in what you have to say. If you think I'm right and you agree with me, then that's cool. You should probably send me a letter or something. I'd really appreciate that. I'd also appreciate if you checked out energysport.net. Loads of good articles on there, and podcasts and everything that you could ask for. So check it out.